presidential election of 1876 between Democrat Samuel Tilden and Republican Rutherford B. Hayes was one of the most controversial in United States history. As the country endured an economic depression, support for Reconstruction, the period after 1865, in which the country tried to redress the effects of slavery in the South, waned, with many Northerners wanting to compromise with the South. By 1876, Democrats had regained control of most of the Southern states. Only 3 states, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, still had Republican governments. Tilden won the national popular vote, winning 51% of the vote to Hayes's 48%. But the Electoral College votes in 3 states, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, plus 1 in Oregon, remained unclear. To sort out the mess, Congress established the Electoral Commission. Secret negotiations had been initiated by Hayes's supporters, however, and this led to the Compromise of 1877. In exchange for all of the disputed electoral votes, which would give Hayes a 185 to 184 win in the Electoral College, Hayes agreed to bring the remaining federal troops back north. Without federal protection, African Americans lost their civil liberties and Democrats took control of the South. Federal troops withdrew from the South in 1877, formally ending Reconstruction and marking the beginning of the Jim Crow era, the period from 1877 to the 1950s when Southern states passed and enforced laws restricting Black civil rights. Southern legislatures created Jim Crow laws specifically to uphold white supremacy. Southern politicians argued that African Americans could be legally segregated from whites if the facilities and opportunities provided to both races were presumably equal, though in practice, they were never equal. This policy underscored Black subordination in most public places in the South. Centered on the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, the 1896 case, Plessy versus Ferguson, challenged the legality of Jim Crow, with the Supreme Court ultimately upholding that the doctrine of separate but equal was constitutional. African Americans were forced to endure separate facilities and services inferior to those afforded white citizens in education, entertainment, housing, and virtually every aspect of daily life. This ruling would not be overturned until 1954. Soon, Jim Crow degraded nearly every aspect of African Americans' daily life, and disenfranchisement laws reinforced inequality. Unfair literacy tests were established to restrict African Americans from voting, no matter how well-schooled they were. While poll taxes, fees charged to voters as a prerequisite for voting, made voting out of reach for most. Ironically, poll taxes would have also undermined poor white voters. But grandfather clauses exempted anyone eligible to vote prior to 1876 or 1877 and their descendants from any obstacles to voting, effectively preserving the rights of poor whites. Organized by Confederate veterans in 1866, the Ku Klux Klan became one of many groups during Radical Reconstruction to use terrorist violence against African Americans and any of their white supporters to enforce white supremacy. To hide their identities and instill fright, members wore white robes, masked themselves, and conducted raids by night. Their frequent killings and vicious beatings of African Americans and sympathetic allies helped restore conservative white rule in several Southern states. Legal opposition from Congress resulted in most of the KKK groups disbanding by the late 1870s. By then, however, the Jim Crow laws operated across the South, and the Klan was no longer needed to uphold white supremacy.